the government is facing increasing pressure to limit the financial impact sanctions on Russia will undoubtedly have on household bills here in the UK.
The country, of course, already facing a cost of living crisis here. How might the global economic fallout as a result of the war in Ukraine affect us further? Ranvir has the details.
Thanks very much. So it will cost more to fill up your car. First of all, petrol prices exceeding £1.55 a litre. It could soar to £1.75 a litre next week. The average household energy bill, we've talked a lot about it, might reach as much as £3,000 a year due to higher gas and oil prices. There are some experts even warning that interest rates could rise to a whopping 10%. Which would mean higher mortgage repayments for about 2.2 million homeowners. And, of course, we're already seeing that food is becoming more expensive with the price of packaging and transport jumping up. And oil prices could also impact holidays. Ryanair warning that the higher flight prices could be coming our way this summer. And the price of cars themselves and building materials may also rise as Russia is one of the world's largest metal suppliers. So plenty, unfortunately, to get our teeth into there.
Thanks, Rani.
We are joined by the Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, Dr. Miatta Fahnbulleh, along with Consumer and Business Advisor Kate Hardcastle. Right, Miatta Fahnbulleh, what's the impact going to be on energy prices and what are we going to do about it?
Well, so we're going to feel the impacts in two ways. Energy prices, we know, have been increasing anyway. Now, we're quite insulated insofar as only 3% of our gas, for example, is imported from Russia. But there are other parts of the world, like Europe, that are importing about 35% of their gas from Russia, who will be looking to other markets. And that's going to increase the prices. So we should expect to see quite a hefty rise in energy prices over and above the really painful increases we've seen to date. And, you know, for me, why that's so difficult is that it's happening at the same time as we know the wages are flatlining, where we've had many people who've not really seen their living standards increase for a decade. So this is going to feel really painful, which is why I think it's absolutely right that the government intervenes in support. It's not ordinary times. These are extraordinary times. And I think there are two things that they can do. There is support they can provide for people on incomes. And actually, one of the quickest things they could do is to increase payments, for example, universal credit, that would protect households that are on low incomes. But alongside that, we need a big push to remove our reliance on fossil fuels. That's about insulating our homes, so we're using less energy. We need a great homes upgrade incredibly quickly so that everyone is reducing the amount of energy they use. And then we need to increase the supply of renewable energy.
All right, that's long term. In the short term, it would appear that Germany is basically building up its courage to do what they would have been unthinkable 2 or 3 weeks ago and stop accepting gas from Russia. They're the biggest users of Russian gas in Europe, we know that. To compensate for doing that, if they do it, the business lobby DHK estimates that they'd have to take deliveries from the world's entire 600-vessel fleet of liquefied natural gas tankers. I mean, a phenomenal intake. What would that do to prices?
Well, that's the indirect impact that I'm talking about. Suddenly, the markets that we go to in order to buy our energy, we have other countries like Germany that are going to be using those same markets. So we should expect to see a big rise. We don't know how big it will be, but it will have an impact because suddenly the number of people demanding energy from, for example, Norway suddenly massively increases, and that will have a knock-on impact on prices. So I come back to the fact that what can we do about it? There are short-term things that you can do to support people's incomes, as well as subsidise the cost of energy. If you look at France, that's what it's doing, essentially asking the state-owned energy provider to cut bills for people and take the hit. So there are things that we can do there. But, you know, this is going to filter through for the next 18 months at least, possibly longer. So we've got to wean ourselves off fossil fuels because the squeeze is there and it looks like it's going to be here for a long time.
Well, we saw during the COVID pandemic that there was an increase, of course, in the universal credit payment, £20 a week. That was then withdrawn. I wonder whether you think that that's something, an emergency uplift like that is timely.
100%. I mean, the irony is, if the Chancellor hadn't made that completely foolhardy decision to reverse the £20 uplift to universal credit, if he hadn't cut it, that £1,000 that households were benefiting from would have offset some of the increase that we're seeing in energy bills. So it was an incredibly short-sighted measure, given that we knew this cost of living crisis was coming. And if the government wanted to act quickly, that would be the way in which they could very, very quickly do that, and that would insulate some of the households that are really struggling. I mean, people are making that decision between heating their homes and feeding their kids in the 6th richest country in the world. So that is a measure that the government could do tomorrow if it wanted to. It's a question of political will.
Yeah. We'll pass that on. Let's go to Oxford now and Kate. Kate, obviously the Ukraine is one of the world's great bread baskets. You know, rivaling the great prairies in Canada and America. Obviously, wheat supplies are going to be severely affected this year. What impact's that going to have on the price of food?
Significant. As we've already heard, we were already amidst this perfect storm of challenges within the food and supply marketplace. We know that there was weather conditions that had impacted it. We hadn't had the crops that we wanted. We know a lot of these manufacturers have been trying to hold off the cost implications and the increases, working with retailers to try and make sure the cost of living stayed stable. But we heard announcements at the beginning of the year. Many organisations were telling us the reality of the situation. That cost of living was going to go up because we were going to see these increases in fuel and food. And indeed, 3 weeks ago, that was the headline on every single newspaper. It's incredibly challenging. Food bank use is up higher than ever. And I'm hearing directly from those food banks that people are going in there with mortgages, dual income families. This is a different set of people relying on those necessities within communities. We have a real challenge here. And I'm afraid that with fuel, it is also an impact on everything beyond that, Richard, you know, beyond bread and wheat and dog food and biscuits and all of those items that do contain wheat, and corn and soy are affected too. But fuel is a massive part of every single industry. It's a cog in a wheel that turns. It affects haulage, it affects production. So we're going to see this increase in cost. My biggest concern is for autumn, because I think as we start to see the weather improve, people might start to become a little bit more considered and feel that they're okay with their bills. But this autumn is going to be one of the most challenging yet. And even last night, American economists were suggesting that the UK might even be hitting recession point then.
Well, Kate, I mean, there's one thing, isn't there? You might see that the price rises are passed on to consumers, but you might also, you know, God forbid, see that the companies take a hit on their profits in order to prevent consumers paying the price. How likely is it that the companies take a bigger hit rather than hard-pressed fuel buyers, you know, and shoppers?
I think there's been some great work by the campaigner Jack Monroe, who's been pushing back on supermarkets to introduce more of the value ranges that weren't there, that had disappeared from the shelves. I think it's really important that every business does the right thing. Consumers buy with heart and mind now, and they do want to make sure that they're buying from ethical organisations who stand by them to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, they are not charities themselves, and they have to survive and they have to pass on costs. I mean, we've seen over years, we've talked about things like shrinkflation, where an item is actually reduced in terms of size, but the price remains the same. So when you're shopping, you do really need to remain vigilant. Yeah. I do agree with the calls on the government. Last 2020, they were helping us to eat out. I think they need to help us to eat. We absolutely need to see some change there. And we need to make sure that we can survive. You know, we put money into the economy will rally. So it makes good sense.
And just very briefly, because we're out of time, just not much more than a couple of sentences, you talk about price rises. What about actual supplies in the shops? I mean, as you say, wheat goes into so many foodstuffs, you know, pasta, bread, biscuits, pastries, you name it. Might we see a shortage of supply, or will supplies hold up, do you think?
Potentially, but we have been very spoilt with the amount of products we have at our fingertips within supermarkets, huge amount of ranges, huge amount of choice. And I think over the past 2 years, the consumers become used to not seeing it there. Just a reminder, though, the average household wastes 40% of its food still. So one of the biggest impacts you can make financially and also for the environment is start trying to work through that, try and waste less food yourselves.
OK, thank you. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Miatta, as well. All very interesting.